All right, everyone. Welcome once again. It is Friday and it is manufacturing e-commerce success. It's time for us to come once again, sharing great people, great knowledge with you. So I'm going to turn it over. Well, I'm one of your co-hosts, Damon Pistolka, first of all. And right over there, brother from another mother, Curt Anderson, is going to take it from here. And let's get going, man.
Damon, hey, how about this handsome guy over here? So Damon, thank you. Happy Friday. Boy, we're at the midway point through July already.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to pretend that I'm not starstruck today. I'm not even no poker face whatsoever.
Yeah.
We have a gift. We have a blessing today. We have Dr. Natalie Nixon. Dr. Natalie Nixon, how are you today?
Hi, Curt. I'm doing really well. Hi, Damon. It's wonderful to be with you today.
So
awesome.
I'm perspiring a little bit here. So guys, drop us a note. Let us know that you're here. Please connect with Damon, connect with myself. But most importantly, you want to check out Dr. Natalie Nixon. So Dr. Natalie Nixon, I have a couple. Let's dig in a little bit of your background. It is just so impressive. And I'm going to try to do this. Let's see, Vassar College. Do I have that right? Cum laude at Vassar College. I think Thomas Jefferson University, master's degree. Now, let me see if I remember this correctly. Global textile marketing. Do I have my close?
That's right.
Super now, so then you continue on and you go to a Ph.D. at University of Westminster. Do I have that correct? And so, yes. Damon, this is like our third Ph.D. in the past 4 weeks. Third Ph.D. So we have Dr. Natalie Nixon, top 50 keynote speaker. You're a contributor to Forbes, Fast Company. You have an award-winning book, Creativity Leap, that we're going to talk about. And of course, you're president, owner, founder of your firm, the Figure 8 Thinking. So, boy, that was a mouthful. So here's my first question for you today. I've been catching some of your. I've been doing a little friendly cyber stalking, and I've caught you have an amazing TED Talk and all sorts. Boy, guys, just Google Dr. Natalie Nixon, all sorts of videos. I think, do you like jazz by any chance? Is jazz like a thing for you?
I kind of do. Yes.
Just a little bit. So my question to you is, as a little girl growing up in Philadelphia, I think I know the answer, but who was your hero growing up as a little girl in Philadelphia?
Well, based on your lead-in, you may be expecting me to say my dad, who absolutely remains one of my heroes. My dad passed away in 2012, but my parents really are my heroes because I actually want to jump ahead to when I was in college. I've often told this anecdote. I was having a first world problem. I was a sophomore in college, first semester of sophomore year, and we were required to declare our majors. And I had no idea. I wanted to really not disappoint my parents. They sacrificed a lot for our education. I was going to an amazing college, Vassar College, and I didn't know what to study. And I was actually not really interested in the majors that seemed kind of impressive, like economics and political science and sociology. And so I'm on the phone with my parents. This is back in the days when there were 2 phones in the house, hardwired. One was in the kitchen and one was in their bedroom. Yep. And they're both listening in on the conversation. And I was just bemoaning how I didn't know what to major in, what to select. They said, well, what do you like? What are you enjoying? I avoided the question. I started going into what I was bad at, what I thought was boring. And they said, what are you enjoying? What do you like? And I very apologetically started to describe how I was really loving all these courses in cultural anthropology, and these Africana studies classes were amazing because I could study philosophy and economics through those lenses. And almost at the same time, my parents said, that's what you should study. And I was like, what? Because I thought I didn't hear them correctly. And they said, no, that's what you should study. So I said, so you'd be all right if I studied maybe even a double major in those areas? And they said, yeah. And my father said, if you study what you love, Natalie, you will have to turn down opportunities. Now, the reason I'm telling this anecdote in the context of your question about who are your heroes is that these are not people who come from a lot of wealth. I didn't have a trust fund. It wasn't like they wanted to really make sure I could pay down those student loans right away because there was money floating around. And often I think we think that things like following your heart, listening to your gut, pursuing your passion is extraneous. It's a luxury. But what I've learned based on my parents' advice is that It's actually essential. And it's actually a much more efficient way to live when we follow our hearts, because my dad was right. No one has to tell you to stay up longer, wake up earlier, work harder when you're loving what you do. So my parents are my heroes. And as you said, I grew up in a household full of music. My dad was a big jazz head. My mother actually trained to be an opera singer in high school.
Wow.
And so I grew up with a lot of European classical music as well as R&B. I'm from Philly, of course, so that it's rich with that music tradition. So that's just a snippet of my family household growing up.
Well, I absolutely love that. And ironically, I have that quote right here, from your dad, and I was going to repeat that. So thank you for sharing that. And I caught another one of your interviews, I think it was just recent, and you were talking about jazz, and there was a jazz singer, and you talked about the song for my father. And so Damon and I are huge, we're girl dads. And just as I was just kind of prepping for our conversation today, boy, it just warmed my heart. What's your father's name?
Frederick Douglass Weathers.
Well, God bless Frederick, and what a wonderful dynamo powerhouse that he produced here with his young daughter here. So thank you, Dr. Natalie, for sharing that about dad, and just what an inspiration that is. So let's slide in. I'm going to talk about your top 50 keynote speaker. Okay. So again, we're getting an understanding of like who Dr. Natalie is, your background, growing up in Philly, mom and dad, just a house full of music. My goodness, mom's an opera singer, dad's just a jazz head, and just, you must have just had a wonderful upbringing, just surrounded by music, but it inspired you to lead a life of becoming a keynote speaker. Where did that come from? How did, share that for us, please?
And also, just to cover, my mother did not end up becoming an opera singer, but music is a through line in her life. Actually, my mom, when she turned 50, she up and learned to play the cello. She never and my mother is now 82 years old, and she's still
that is
wow, that's awesome.
And what's mom's name?
Carol.
Well, hey, we're giving a shout out, and if Carol catches this, we want to give a big shout out to Carol.
Yes. So awesome. It's really interesting. I absolutely love the work that I do. I really believe that I get paid to learn. And even in the chapter of my career when I was a professor, clearly that was a lot of what I was literally doing. I think great teachers are great learners. And that was one of the things I loved about being an academic. And what I do now at Figure Eight Thinking is really to advise leaders on transformation. And I do that through the lenses of creativity and foresight. And I didn't actually set my sights on becoming a keynote speaker. As in so many things that I do, I really follow the breadcrumbs. I really pay attention to what is sticking, what is bringing me joy, what I seem to be really good at, and what's touching people. And I left academia in 2017, and I'm in year 5 of building Figure Eight Thinking. And the first couple of years, I really said yes to anything because I was actually terrified that maybe this was all a fluke, that maybe people wouldn't continue to hire me. But fortunately, that has not been the case. I continue to get amazing opportunities and projects. But speaking really early on, within this, this relatively recent 5-year window, I realized is a gift that I have. I am really good at it. And I love it. And it for me, it helps me to continue to learn for a living, because in order for me to infuse my talks with relevant, helpful, tactical ideas, I need to always be learning. And what's interesting is, in some ways, my background as a professor definitely helped, but there's a difference between professing, teaching, and speaking. But there are elements certainly that overlap.
Absolutely. So, hey, I want to give a couple of shout outs. We've got Val here today. Val, happy Friday. We've got our dear buddy, John Baglino. He's just over the border in Jersey. We've got Adam Baker. He's a fellow Pennsylvanian. We've got Christina Harrington. But Christina, Dr. Natalie Nixon, you two absolutely want to connect, both powerhouses here. Dan Bigger's here. We've got Curtis Thompson. So guys, give a shout out. Please connect with Dr. Natalie Nixon here on LinkedIn, and you'll thank me later, right, Damon?
Yeah.
So, Dr. Dr. Natalie Nixon, I feel compelled. I have to call you Dr. Natalie.
You don't have to. You can please just call me Natalie.
You've earned it. So anyway, Damon, I want to share a couple of things. Guys, when you go on Dr. Natalie Nixon's LinkedIn profile, we'll call her Natalie. So when you go on Natalie's LinkedIn profile, I just want to share, she has dozens of testimonials. And this one really stuck. So our crowd are manufacturers, or that's who we we're not opera singers by any stretch, but that's who Damon and I sing to, that manufacturing crowd. You gave a speech to the Association of Manufacturing Excellence Champions. Did I say that correctly, Damon? We're not invited to that one, but Dr. Natalie was, and she was a host. And I just want to, and then if you check out some of the things that are commented about her speeches, if you have the blessing and gift of being in the audience for Natalie, powerful speaker, wealth of knowledge, passion to communicate. All executives were wanting more. Other people were saying like immensely talented and love of people. So Dr. Natalie Nixon, let's slide into your book. So you have an award-winning book called The Creativity Leap. Man, and I was listening to you this week, and I can't tell you how many times I say I'm not creative. And like you kind of scolded, like people should never say that. And I'm like, oh my goodness, she's scolding me. And I love that you said that. I completely embrace it. Please enlighten us today. You're a creativity strategist. So many manufacturers out there that Damon and I talked to, maybe folks in the room here, we're guilty of saying, boy, I'm not creative. We're a commodity. We're a custom job shop. Enlighten us, please. Talk about this creativity leap.
Okay, so you absolutely are creative. As humans, we're hardwired to be creative. The distinction is whether or not you're being really intentional about setting aside the time, making sure the space in your environment is such that it really helps you to spark, in the way I think about creativity, both the wonder and sit down to do the rigor that creativity requires. Because as you know, Curt, the way I define creativity is that it's our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And I spent several years doing research, prototyping a lot of ideas and frameworks before landing on that definition. But the reason I started going down this journey, this path to really, in my view, democratize creativity, simplify the way we think about it so that it becomes more accessible, is because in those first few years of building figure eight thinking, a lot of the impetus of why companies were hiring me is that they wanted to build cultures of innovation. And innovation is still this big buzzword. But I was observing that a lot of the time we were talking over and around each other. We didn't have a common understanding of what we meant by innovation. By the way, I define innovation as an invention converted into scalable value. So as long as it's just an invention, it's not yet an innovation, right? And that value can be financial value, social value, cultural value. But how do you go from an invention, a concept, to an innovation? That conversion factor, in my view, is actually creativity. Now, the challenge is I was in a lot of Fortune 500 sorts of corporations. If I were to lead with creativity, because my thinking, the more I was doing this consulting work, was that, gosh, we really should be starting with creativity if we want to innovate. But I knew I couldn't lead with the word creativity because people will look at me like I have three heads, because we think that creativity is only something that artists do, that if you're good at playing a musical instrument or dance or theater. So by landing on this definition of it's our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems, then you really quickly realize that the best engineers, accountants, lawyers, teachers, farmers, artists are super creative when they're doing this toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And I'd like to just add, I'm not sure if you realize this, but part of my background, in addition to anthropology, is fashion. And I was an entrepreneurial hat designer, but I also worked in global fashion sourcing. So I actually worked in manufacturing, and I saw a ton of creativity, especially when I was living and working abroad in Sri Lanka, in Portugal, right in the midst of the factories, the yarn mills, the dye houses. And that's where I saw immense creativity in troubleshooting, the problem solving that line engineers, textile engineers would engage in to ensure that a t-shirt would be made at the highest qualities, lowest cost and shortest lead time, which are the basic, parameters for, especially with apparel sourcing. So I know from my own experience, I've observed and seen how creative engineers, for example, in the field of manufacturing have to be and are.
Yeah, that is so good. And we get a couple more shout outs. We've got Dan Bigger in the house and Christina Harrington. Damon, if you want to pull that comment up, that was a great comment there. Ooh, are you being intentional with your creativity to create that spark? So good, Natalie Nixon.
Yeah. What's really something though, you talk about, and I went to school for engineering, right? And I always talk about, I'm not creative, but when you step back and thinking about it in the way that you talk about it, I've been very creative at times.
Yes.
And I love the idea of toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems, because that is day in and day out. These people in manufacturing are doing this. Like you said, the people on the floor, the people solving people problems, the people solving supply chain problems. They creatively have to problem solve based on what the situation they're given.
Yeah. And there's no script, right? Whenever there's no script, you have to be super creative. And just to dig in a little further about what those two dimensions really are about, wonder is about our capacity to dream, to be super audacious, to ask really big blue sky questions. It's about deep curiosity. It's also about awe, and it's about pausing. I mean, I can't do what construction engineers do who build, for example, bridges. Like, first of all, to even imagine that you could figure out a way to span a body of water, for example, to bridge two land masses, that's amazing.
Right.
I have a different type of beautiful brain. Like, that's not the question that occurs to me. I'm like, okay, someone else will figure that out, right? But there are some people who really wonder about that, right? And ask really interesting questions about that. But then they also need the rigor, right? Which is the discipline, the focus, the time on task, the skill mastery. And I remind people that rigor is not particularly sexy. It's often very solitary, and it is an absolutely essential dimension of creativity. A lot of the time when we think about creativity, we stop at wonder. We think, oh yeah, so creativity is doing whatever you feel like. But if any of you have ever had any sort of artistic pursuit, if we go back to the arts for a moment, you are so aware of how much rigor it takes in order to really amplify the creativity in your artistic endeavor. So for me, my artistic endeavor has been dance. You don't get to do pirouettes and leap across the stage immediately. That takes years before you even get invited to audition to be on the stage, right? Mm-hmm. So all of the rigor that's required to tone your body, to be able to reverse engineer and deconstruct your body, to stretch, to understand technique in various disciplines of dance and technique. You need the great American choreographer and dancer Twyla Tharp has a great book called The Creative Habit. Highly recommend it. And in that book, one of the things she says is before you can think out of the box, you got to start with the box, which is right. You need to know, what are the rules? What's the structure? And then you can extend against that and rebound against it. So it's so important to not forsake rigor when you're thinking about creativity. And then in my view, that's the only way individuals, leaders, organizations are going to build a capacity for sustainable innovation. They have to first start with the creative capacity.
Oh, this is so good. And Damon, awesome. A couple more. We have Gail here today. Gail's our co-host. She's taking my place next week. Gail, thank you for being here. Gail, you absolutely have to connect with Natalie. We've got our dear friend, Nicole. Nicole, thank you for joining us today. Nicole, you need to connect with Natalie here. Dan Bigger has a couple of comments. So, Natalie, you mentioned a couple of things. When you look, and what we encourage you, if you're just chiming in, we have top 50 keynote speaker here, Dr. Natalie Nixon. You absolutely want to check out her website, Figure 8 Thinking, and you're just getting a small sliver of this dynamo here. What a powerhouse.
No doubt.
Natalie, you mentioned, your background, fashion, design, anthropology, thinking, academia, dance, and of course, some jazz. Now let's take a deep dive. You know what? Before I go there, I want to mention your PhD. What was your dissertation in your PhD?
Wow, you really did your research. I really
just a little cyber stalking there, but
I appreciate that. Thank you. So my PhD is in a field called design management, and I did it at the University of Westminster in London. And I was at a stage in my career where I had a master's degree. I was a professor. My mentors were saying, you should do a PhD. It gives you a lot more options. You're a great professor. It's like, yeah, I don't need to prove how smart I am in a little bitty area. I looked at programs in the States. None really spoke to me. And I was on my way over to London for a completely different reason. And a week before I left, a friend emailed me about this field called design management. And he said, this is totally you. It's like design and business, creativity and strategy. I was like, I've never heard of that. I Googled it. Turned out it was huge in Europe and the UK. And long story short, I ended up applying to getting accepted into the University of Westminster's program. So design management started as this field to really look at helping designers as they elevate an organization, how the business of management. But what it expanded into is to also incorporate things like service design and the role of systems design when you're thinking about organization. So there's a bit of org design and some change management in it. I ended up working with the Ritz-Carlton Hotel to understand the ways that they design experiences that delight guests. And to my delight, and this did not happen in a very nice, neat, lockstep, linear way. There's a reason why not everyone has a PhD, because it's really hard. And I did it while working full time. But I had a Skype call with my principal advisor, Dr. Allison Riepel, who's amazing. And I was in the doldrums because I was at the stage of the PhD process where I needed to understand my theoretical construct. I barely understood what that meant. I certainly didn't know what my theoretical construct was going to be. And so we're about to end the call and I'm close to tears. And I said, well, there is just this one thing. I had started collecting data, started doing interviews. I said, there's just this theme where people keep talking about when things are going well and things are humming, it's like jazz, or they'll say things like it flows. And she said, hang on. And she said, with a British accent, you're talking about improvisational organizations. I was like, what? She said, yeah, it's a thing. Go on, read up about it. I'll talk to you next week. So I learned that there's an entire group of academics who research improvisational organizations through the lens of theater. And there's a whole theater improv, and there's a whole nother that look at it through the lens of jazz music. And that was so special to me because number one, I finally figured out a theoretical construct. And number two, as an African-American, jazz music is African-Americans' contribution to helping America, be known throughout the world. It's our classical music form, and what jazz meant in my family, in my home. So it felt very personal. So I ended up using a heuristic from jazz music that Frank Barrett developed. Frank Barrett is a jazz musician. He's a professor out in San Diego. He's written great books about jazz and organizations. And I mapped that heuristic against my data and the ways I was seeing the ways that the Ritz-Carlton, a luxury hotel organization, the ways that they design experiences that delight their guests. And it turns out that the Ritz-Carlton is not a stuffy, rigid organization. It is incredibly improvisational. And it has to be, especially when you're working in a sector like hospitality, which is all about the design of experiences and services. In the moment, you must be able to adapt. You must be able to embrace mistakes. You must be able to figure out the next and the build. So it ended up being a really amazing experience to do that research.
Okay.
Oh, I bet.
Much here. We're going to take a moment of silence right here, guys. I want everybody to just savor this. If you're catching this on replay, do me a favor. Take I'm an older guy. Take the rewind button and just go back just a little bit and just recap that. But Natalie, Damon, you got to pull up Christina's comment here. So just Man, I'm like getting chills just listening to this, Natalie. So this is just so good. Where do you find all these smart? Man, I'm just getting smarter listening to Dr. Natalie here. This is so good, man. I have so much I'm going to unpack right there. First off, Ritz-Carlton. Why is this relevant for manufacturers? Damon, for a shameless plug, I have a blog post that I use that I mention all the time. How for a manufacturer, how to from your website, your web presence, social media, treat your manufacturing operation like you're a 5-star resort. I have a chapter in my book. It's that exactly. So, Dr. Natalie, I love that you dropped that comment. I want to slide into jazz for a little bit, and it's funny. I had a comment, a question for you from listening to you this week. Improv like jazz. Be in the moment. And with jazz, there's no present and there's no future. Like you're in the now. And I caught the movie La La Land with my daughter the other day. And if anybody's seen La La Land, there's a lot of jazz in there. And I was thinking about you on how, there's different riffs and the trumpet player is going to do this and the drummer is going to do this. But, what you talk about is like how everybody comes together and literally, pun intended, makes magic. It makes music together. Talk about that creativity as a team a little bit, and like why you feel jazz is so relevant, but how this is so relevant for manufacturers.
Yes, well, I think a lot of us hope for a different metaphor. I think the metaphor a lot of us hope for in the way we lead and the way our teams work is that it's like a finely tuned orchestra.
Yeah.
And the challenge with that's a great model. The challenge is that we are in environments where there's constant change. A lot of you probably heard this term VUCA environments, where the environment is volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. And in my view, because that is the reality, it makes a lot more sense maybe to shift to a different metaphor, a metaphor of having our teams and our leadership style adapt from what we can learn from the way jazz musicians work, which is a lot of what Frank Barrett has written about and talks about. So I won't run through all 7 principles, but some of the examples are that jazz musicians embrace mistakes. In jazz, there's no such thing as a mistake. Right. It's all about the build. Like you don't in an orchestra, if there's a mistake, it's like, the show has to stop. But in jazz, it's about the build. It's like, what else you got? Like you got to keep it going. Like you don't stop if you played in the wrong key by accident, or if you ended up going into your part too soon as being a duet instead of a solo, that sort of thing. In jazz, there's a lot of hallway moments. A lot of the magic and vibing between the players happens when they're on the road on the tour bus, when they're when they're backstage, when they're in the hallway waiting to go on. What are the equivalents in your own organization? How can you create those hallway moments, especially in these hybrid work environments? It used to be maybe a water cooler, but there's still opportunities to do that. In jazz, also, there's a lot of soloing and supporting. So I always use the example of the great Art Blakey, who was just a fantastic drummer. He was the leader of his quartets, of his quintets. As the drummer, he typically was in the back, but he kind of would center himself, but he was always to the back, had no problem letting other musicians cede to the front, which meant he ceded control. Even Miles Davis, as I often say, I wouldn't want to be around Miles Davis on a personal level, but he was brilliant. He was just such a brilliant artist, and he constantly evolved. And he brought along the young John Coltrane, who was from Philadelphia, as a really young musician. He loved bringing along younger jazz musicians. So what does that look like in an organization? Well, let's take one of the biggest artifacts of organizations, the meeting. Does it have to be the same person who always leads the meeting? How might the leader recede to the back? How might you let a junior level person lead, or a person who's newer to the organization lead? So there's all sorts of cool ways that can also be applied to the work you're doing in manufacturing in terms of embracing mistakes, solo support, hallway moments. There's all sorts of great tips there.
All right, this is moment of silence number 2. It's lunchtime, Damon. It's lunchtime over here on the East Coast. So let's just savor what was just said here for like, dude. I'm like tearing up. You're giving me chills. No one's
incredible.
Keynote speaker in the world, not like Philadelphia, not United States, in the world. We are blessed. Thank you. That we have Dr. Natalie Nixon. Damon, please pull up a couple comments here. Actually asked a great question, and maybe, I don't know, maybe it was covered in this. Fascinating. Do you intentionally foster that sort of improvisation in your organization, Dr. Natalie? What do you think of that?
So I have a small team at Figure Eight Thinking, but the way that I do it and the way that I work is I do what I call rigor sprints, and I also do what I call wonder sprints. So rigor sprints are when I isolate my office with no notifications, no music, not even a glass of water in front of me. So no distractions. And I give myself typically an odd number of minutes, like 19 minutes or 33 minutes or 7 minutes to do a deep dive. For example, when I'm writing something, and that's an example of improvisation. I don't interrupt my thoughts. I don't judge the negative Nancy who sits on one shoulder and the angelic person who sits on the other, but I just let it come out, right? And in my advisory work, one of the things I like to, an exercise that I often lead people through is something called question storming. So you've heard of brainstorming. If you read my work, then you know that I'm a big proponent of curiosity and asking big questions. I love the work of Warren Berger, who wrote A More Beautiful Question. And question storming is when you have a subject that you're interested in, like, I don't know, maybe it's throughput time if you're manufacturing, or a supply chain challenge, or a vendor management issue, whatever it might be. And instead of trying to figure out answers, you have each person, let's say it's a team of 4 people, each have a blank piece of paper and a pen, and you set the timer to not to 30 minutes, not to 15 minutes, to like 90 seconds. And each person, based on the prompt, has to generate question after question after question. And there's a lot more that you can tell about each other by the quality of the questions that we ask than even the answers. And then based on those questions, you pick 2 or 3 of those questions to focus on those. And now, having said that, there is what I call a taxonomy of questions. Not all questions are created equally. There are divergent questions like why, what if, I wonder, what might be the impact of, right? Those are the really big questions. Then there are convergent questions like what, when, who. So I would start with the divergent questions that let each other dream really big first. Don't go straight to the convergent questions like when does this due? Who did it, not that. Hold off on that. And then there's hybrid questions. I call how questions hybrid. The how, the process, it can be straightforward, but sometimes it's not so straightforward. So that's why I call how questions hybrid. So that's an example of how you can work improvisationally to really hack yourselves, to kind of hack the system in the same way you've been thinking. Instead of thinking about solutions, think about questions.
Yeah. John Buglino, he's keeping count. This is number 3. So this is Mona Steinless number 3. Okay. Yeah. All right, Damon, you got to pull up some of these comments here. I can't believe how good this is.
Yeah,
this is so good. I'm like, I can't express how humbled I am to even be with you. Now I know Dr. Natalie use wondering and rigoring as verbs. And guys, first off, we're at the time. I completely lost track of time. So Rizvi, thank you for joining us. Question storming, dude, was that just a brilliant? What a concept, right? So I haven't been keeping track of time. If you've just joined us, we're here with Dr. Natalie Nixon. Please check out, she has an amazing TED Talk. She has an award-winning book called Creativity Leap. You want to check out her website. Yeah. Please connect with her here on LinkedIn, and you will thank Damon and I later. So wondering, vigoring, you have a comment that here's a quote. Here's Damon. Here's a Dr. Natalie quote for you.
All right.
Is everybody sitting down for this one? Is everybody out there sitting down? I don't know if you need to pull up any other comments, Damon, before I drop this bomb. So create like your life depends on it.
Yes.
But let me just say that again. Create like your life depends on it. I'm so inspired by that comment. Can you please share with folks, like, what do we do with that?
Well, I put out the challenge to create like your life depends on it, because it actually does. Because a lot of us are dying a slow death at jobs, at work that is not fulfilling. And I'm not saying that every job has to jazz you up and be amazing, but we do need to figure out the opportunities to insert the creativity in the ways that I'm thinking about it, to insert the opportunities for wonder and for rigor, and to also understand, one of the things my mother would always tell us is that all learning is interconnected. So the years throughout college when I earned money catering have been just as valuable to me as when I got paid to live and work abroad. Is just as valuable as the times when I was teaching, when I was dancing. So you have to create like your life depends on it, because as I said at the start of our conversation, we're hardwired to be creative. And one of the reasons why so many of us are not flourishing in whatever it is, the work that we're doing, is that there's not opportunities for the wonder. And in manufacturing, there's opportunity for wonder. And also we're conflating rigidity for rigor, right? We think we're being rigorous, we're actually being rigid. And there's a big difference, right? So rigidity says, well, we said we were going to do X, Y, Z, and we're going to keep doing, although all alarm bells are going off, red flags are raising, right? That's rigidity. Rigor sees the alarm bells and the red flags, pauses, takes stock, and really adapts to the context. I'm from Philly. I live in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and we have this folkloric moment every winter of the groundhog keeping up to let us know, how many more weeks of winter we have. But that little groundhog, we actually have quite a few in our backyard, but they're not that little. The groundhog peeps up, and it looks at the environment, does an environmental scan. And when we're rigorous, we allow ourselves to take stock of the environment, and then we proceed accordingly. So creating like your life depends on it doesn't just mean, and I mean this facetiously. I also paint. I'm not a great painter. I paint. Actually, I've been paid for some of my paintings. I paint. I'm not just talking about picking up a paintbrush, which is great to do, but I'm talking about really integrating the wonder and the rigor into your work in the ways that I've been describing.
Oh, this is so good. I want to be mindful of your time as we start winding down. You talk about humble leadership with your creativity. Can you just enlighten, you've done such an amazing job with your career, inspiring literally thousands, millions of folks and audiences all over the place. Any tips or advice for folks, especially at the manufacturing floor, if they're focusing on diversity, they're trying to, workforce shortages now. Any tips or advice on like, how do we really play that role as humble leaders out there?
I think in a very meta way, you just did it, Curt. It really starts by asking questions. It starts by asking for help. I created a course called the Wonder Rigor Lab. It's an online DIY course, and there's 4 milestones in the course. And the 4 milestones correspond to the word LEAP, L-E-A-P. And the first milestone is to leverage everything you've experienced, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The second milestone is to be able to envision an incredibly audacious future, and I take you through all sorts of ways to do that. The third milestone is for ask, and it's about learning to ask questions, and it's also about learning to ask for help. I recommend a great book called The Art of Asking. It's by, just forgot her name. I always do this, but she's actually a punk rock musician.
Oh, is she really?
Yeah.
Nice. Anybody wants to Google that, drop that in the chat box. So The Art of Asking. So
The Art of Asking. And she actually she was what's it called, a husker. She would be on the middle of Cambridge Square and in Cambridge in Boston, and she'd be dressed as a bride, all in white, her face painted in white, and she'd have a flower extended, and she'd just be this frozen statue, and she'd be collecting pennies, quarters, dollar bills. She then her punk rock band, which I can remember that name. It's called the Dresden Dolls. The name will come out to me. They were one of the first successful $1 million Kickstarter fundraisers.
Okay.
She used Twitter constantly when they were on tour around the world to couch surf, and she on her way to Australia and asked fans through Twitter, "We want to have a place where we can stay." And her point was she was learning to ask for help, and then a series of others. I won't go down. So it's a great book. Amanda Palmer. Her name is Amanda Palmer. The Art of Asking.
Thank you, Christina.
That is what builds humility. It's learning to ask for help, and it's not being afraid to look silly, not being afraid to surprise. You're not the smartest person in the room. It's really okay. And to understand that, I like to say questions are inputs into a system. And the more diverse the questions, the more innovative the output. But the only way we have a diversity of questions is if we have a wide range of people around us. You mentioned DEI and diversity of ethnicity, of gender, of background and experience and skill set. So manufacturing is definitely a sector that's under a lot of pressure, a lot of constraints, new technology from every direction and figuring out how to integrate it. But it's about understanding how to shift your paradigm. And the paradigm shift doesn't have to be 90 degrees or 180 degrees. A paradigm shift can be 5 degrees. It's just all of a sudden, instead of looking at it this way, you look at it, oh, this way. This is interesting. And what might happen if I partner with this person? What might happen if we call up a former competitor and forge an interesting alliance and create some kind of co-opetition, right? But it starts with that humility has to start with asking questions of yourself, and then being able to ask for help.
Man, okay. I think, John, was that 4 or 5? I'm not sure what we're up to, but all right. So my last question for the day, Natalie, man, this is okay. And here's the irony. I feel a little bit embarrassed, right? And so Damon and I, we do this because, we love embarrassing ourselves, or just, right, Damon, we just put ourselves out there. We're never the smartest guy on the Zoom when we're here on this stage. So Natalie, here's just last week, we do a lot of work with what's called the Manufacturing Extension Partnerships. We had a wonderful dynamo, amazing woman last week. Her name is Janelle Lee. We were talking about like technology, manufacturing, and how like all the cool kids are going into manufacturing these days, just to put that out there. And I was saying, you know what? I'm a big history buff, and that's why I feel like I really resonate and connect with you well. And I would say, I just said last Friday, I feel like we're in the midst of a revolution, some type of an industrial revolution where technology is meeting manufacturing. You've coined a phrase, and maybe I just missed this. We're in the 4th industrial revolution. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did not coin that phrase. That is not my phrase.
Please enlighten us on that, because I've heard you several times say that, and I'm just captivated. I couldn't love that more, and now I'm going to borrow it, maybe steal it, and repeat it. But please enlighten us on this 4th industrial revolution.
Yeah, please borrow it and use it as much as you need. The 4th industrial revolution refers to how ubiquitous technology is, and it's referring to the fact that AI, AR, VR, robotics, automation are integrated into our daily lives. So in my office right now, I have an ALEXA. I won't say it out loud because it's right? That's powered by both augmented reality and AI. If we don't know the definition of a word, we Google it. That's AI. A lot of surgeries in hospitals today are being done not with physicians in the room, but a room or two over done by robotics, right? So the train has left the station. So the 4th industrial revolution is designating this time when the economy is being disrupted because of the ubiquitous integration of technology in so many areas of our life, to the point where I used to share this story. I have a LinkedIn article about this. I have a friend who's Estonian. We met some years ago in Estonia. We caught up with each other again in Shenzhen, China, for this startup mentoring program we were both involved in. We were at breakfast, and Mark just casually referenced the chip in his hand. And I said, wait, what did you say? And he said, oh, yeah, the chip in my hand. I said, you have a chip in your hand? And at the time, he was head of innovation for SEB Bank, which is just across the waters in Sweden. And he said, yeah. I said, can I feel it? And he said, sure. And he held up his hand. It felt like a tiny little bone spur at the base of his thumb. And he said, we decided that we needed to walk the talk, working in innovation. And we started hosting beer and chips parties at the end of the day. So they get tattoo artists who would come in. There's beer. And if you want, you can get a chip inserted. And I said, what do you use the chip for? He goes, I use it to access the building. I can use it to lock my bicycle. Probably shortly we'll be able to use it to get the subway, the train. And it was fascinating to me. I felt so American because, Estonia is a former Soviet bloc. And I think our political economies have a lot to do with our cultural mindset. As Americans, we're very individualist driven, and we don't want so much control over our bodies, over our movement. Mm-hmm. And I thought, gosh, I don't think I could ever do that. I mean, but at the same time, people are putting chips in their pets. Mm-hmm. People are tracking their kids' movement with their phones, right? Yeah. Yeah. So the fourth industrial revolution signifies this moment when, when the economy is getting disrupted because of the ubiquity of technology.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. I think that's number 5. That's number 5. So Damon, could you pull up Christina Harrington has a nice comment, and Natalie, you would love Christina. She's a CEO, president of an e-commerce firm exclusive for manufacturers. She is just absolutely delightful.
There's that book title again.
Yeah, there's that book, and great book there. So let's wind down in this. If you're just catching us or didn't catch the beginning, I want to close out with a quote that Natalie, that you opened up with, and I had it right here on my cue card. It's from our dear friend, Father Frederick Douglass, right? That good old dad. Study what you love, and you will turn down opportunities. And you can just, this, what a gift this has been to Damon, myself, everybody here today. Thank you for sharing your brilliance, your experience, your passion, your expertise. I want to give a shout out to Mom and Dad, to Carol, and to Frederick Douglass for sharing. I'm just absolutely speechless. And so I know how busy you are. And so we'll wind down on this, guys. Please connect with Natalie. Again, award-winning book, Creativity Leap. Check out her website, Figure 8 Thinking. And my daughter's a figure skater, so I love the figure 8.
Oh, nice.
So I was at the skating rink the other day listening to a podcast of yours. So that was a nice connection that we had. Awesome. So connect with Natalie on LinkedIn here. Natalie, were any speaking engagements, any events, anything that you want to promote, plug, or you want to share with folks out there today?
Well, a lot of my upcoming speaking engagements are with privately helped through companies. But I would like your audience to know that if they're interested in any of the downloadable goodies that I offer, everything from the Wonder Rigor tip sheet, a free sample chapter of my book, they can simply go to Figure 8 Thinking, the number 8, thinking.com, and there's a tab called Resources. Under Resources, it says Downloads. So if you go to the Downloads tab on the figure8thinking.com website, you can download all sorts of cool stuff. And you'll also get a chance to subscribe to the EverWonder monthly newsletter, and do stay in touch.
Absolutely. Nice. So again, guys, connect with Dr. Natalie here on LinkedIn. Check out her website. Do yourself a favor, buy her book. Check out her TED Talk. You've been on interviews with Gary Vee, Seth Godin, you name it. You've had just wonderful delight conversations with all sorts of folks, sharing your expertise and just making us all a little bit more creative. So thank you for that. So guys, we want to wish you an amazing, wonderful, glorious weekend. Thank you for joining us. Everybody that dropped comments here, we appreciate you more than you know. Dr. Natalie, hang out with us for 1 second. And Damon, take it away, dude.
I really can't even speak. I mean, this is a record for me. I sit and take a lot of notes during this, but Dr. Natalie, so many great ideas. Just love the way you look at creativity. And and innovation and the whole thing, and just pointed out so much for us today. And thanks so much, everyone, for being here. We're gonna be back again next week, and next week we've got a guest host. Gail Robertson's going to be with us, and we're gonna have Wesleyan Greer.
And real quick, Damon, you would, as a matter of fact, Natalie, you will love our guest on, you know what? He's a Brooklyn guy, so he's not a Philly guy, but we have Carl Brown. Carl Brown is on the History Channel series, Food That Built America. He has a podcast, small business. It's a small business podcast. He's the director of Washington, D.C. Small Business Development Center. So Carl Brown is going to be with us this Monday, another powerhouse, just to kind of, boy, we got to keep that bar high for everybody. So join us on Monday. We have a great guest, Wesleyan and Gail are going to be here next Friday. And Natalie, Dory Clark is a fellow top 50 keynote speaker. She's speaking 2 weeks from today. So
what a treat.
Yeah, awesome. Dory's great. So we're just keeping it going. So again, Dr. Natalie, thank you. God bless you. And guys, hang on 1 second. Thank you, Damon.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone, for us, Manufacturing E-commerce Success. Love to have you all here with us every week, and look forward to seeing you again next week. We'll be back. Bye.